Welcome back to where Steve's whole journey with Arabella began, and where he has been spending time caring for his mom along with his sisters. But over the last 5 weeks, he's also managed to make repairs and a few changes to Victoria. And by the end of the video, he'll also have the sailing rig up and he'll go for a test sail. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all the support you've been sending Steve's way.
So Robin and I managed to borrow my mom's truck since it would be easier with Victoria. We blasted up to Maine, checked on Arabella, all was well, grabbed a few things, put Victoria here in the back of my mom's truck, and came back to Mass. This is something that I can come out for a couple hours every day and poke and pick away at while we're doing other things. And this is something that has been on the to-do list for a while, and it's really difficult to work on it when you're using it. And right now we don't need to use it, so we can work on it. So I'll run you through a couple things. The main one here is along the keel, along the bottom. A little bit of work to do. Mostly it's just that we've used Victoria very hard, like I said we would. So before I get into what we need to fix here on Victoria, I just want to say that Bob did a fantastic job building her. We've used her for an entire year now. She's been loaded up on off the boat. She's been run up on rocky beaches, loaded up with gear and dogs. We use her every day, and we are not necessarily gentle with her. And I told Bob that that would be the case. I don't want anyone to think that what we're doing here and any modifications that we're making have anything to do with Bob not doing a great job. It really just has to do with the timber that was used here and how Victoria has been used. And these are kind of things that I think you could expect to see in the first couple of years of any wooden boat that is put in the water and used really hard. You know, some stuff's just gonna move and tweak and need a little bit of repair, and it's not a big deal.
I'd like to break in here for a minute to thank the sponsor of today's video, Mooncool. As some of you know, I also run a small cinema in Newburyport, Massachusetts, the Screening Room, and I prefer to take a bike for the 14-mile round trip from my home in Amesbury. So I was really happy when Mooncool sent their new fat tire folding tricycle, the TK1, for me to try out on the route. For assembly, I pretty much had to get it out of the packing materials, put on the front wheel, and top off the long-range 48-volt battery, and it was ready to take for a spin. The 750 peak watt motor easily climbed some of the steep hills around town, and it cruises very comfortably over the bumps and gravel thanks to the front suspension. And the front and rear hydraulic disc brakes bring it all to a safe stop. It's also got a fantastic lighting package with brake lights and turn signals. The front and rear baskets are great for quick runs to the store and back, and with a 350-pound capacity, you can haul quite a lot of stuff. This TK1 model can also fold up, allowing for easy storage and transportation. And I use the parking brake feature all the time. I've definitely enjoyed the first 100 miles on my Mooncool trike and love having a new way to move around and get things done without the car. You can check out the TK1 or their many other bikes at mooncool.com, and we thank Mooncool again for sponsoring today's video.
So the glass cracked along the sides here, but this still feels fairly stable, even though it does have a bit of a crack in it. And this piece of locust here looks like it was bent on, got a little wet, sprung up a little bit, and so we have this crack that's opened up. So the first thing we want to do with this is be very aggressive and go around and rip off any fiberglass that we can get off. This seems really well adhered over here. I don't think any of that's coming off. Seems to really just be on the width of the locust here. And you can see how This was more exposed, so it's dried a bit over the last couple days. And this is where I just peeled that glass off of, and that's all wet. So I want to get all of this loose glass peeled off and give this another day or two to dry out. And then we can start doing the repairs on it, which really is just going to be adding a little bit of glass to these areas, filling this up with some epoxy, and should be good to go. So I am not going to try to pull this shut. I'm going to assume that it's happy where it is. And we're just going to clean this out, open it up a little more, and this will be the miracle of epoxy. We'll just squeeze that right in there. And then when we do the fiberglass, we'll overlap it onto the mahogany a bit and make sure that we've got good connection there. And that should hopefully this doesn't want to move any more than it already has. And having that filled up with the glue, some fiberglass over and down onto the mahogany a little bit, I think we'll do the trick for that. Glassing hardwoods is not always an easy thing to do. The wood likes to move, doesn't glue super easily. And I just think 2 layers of glass just wasn't quite enough to contain it. So we'll let this dry out and we'll rough it up. You can see this here is pretty chewed up from us having to drag Victoria up or down a beach if she gets left with the tide when we're ashore or whatnot. So I think I'm going to just taper this down right to the hull. We'll fiberglass over it, and that'll take away a little bit of a catch point, and I don't think that'll alter any performance at all on the boat. There's a couple little spots like this where we hit a nail that was sticking out of a dock, or we bumped into a rock or something. So we'll put a little bit of epoxy in there, and when we sand the hull and repaint, those will disappear. I think there's just a couple of them. But as we sand the hull, we will certainly find them. All right, you ready to do some fiberglass work?
Sure.
You think you want to cut the top first or the bottom first?
Top first, I think.
Want to try? You go as fast as you want.
Okay.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. This very dry cedar soaked up a lot of denatured alcohol, so I think this still needs a few more minutes to dry. And then we can mix up some epoxy and wet it out. What I'd like to do is mix up a little batch, and I have some chip brushes, and we'll just paint all of the wood here, and just kind of sit here and keep applying it until it seems like the cedar stops soaking up the epoxy. And then at that point we can wet it out a bit heavier and put the first piece of glass on. But I really want to make sure that we get a good bond with that old cedar. Joys of working with reclaimed wood. So everything peeled off the keel really easy, and I had a section here that came off as well, and I was poking the edge of the fiberglass with a knife and just kind of like peeling it back, and that is when I realized that what I thought was the fiberglass to the wood failing, it was actually the wood itself failing. So I was stripping off strips here and just throwing them in the trash, and then I kind of realized that a big section was coming off and it really shouldn't be, and I looked more closely at one of the fiberglass strips, and here we have the fairing compound that was used to help fair out the hull, and we've got the cedar. So the epoxy bond between the fiberglass and the fairing compound and the wood didn't fail. The joint with the wood and the fairing compound with the wood was what was failing. So very long story short, I tore off more glass here than I really needed to. We've got our first layer of glass marked out, and our second. When was the last time you did any glass work?
A year and a half ago when we were doing the transom of my boat. That's pretty fun.
I think that's about the same amount of time since I've done fiberglass work. It's been more sailing than building this last year.
Yeah. Sailing's fun.
Yeah,
Almost as fun as building.
Alright, I'll throw some gloves on and mix up a little batch. So the boat was built with high performance epoxy, which has been doing a great job. So we are going to stick with that. 2-to-1. And a chip brush. Alright, you want to start painting those sections?
Sure.
Be as neat as you can.
Okay. Should I paint the part that has glass on it too?
No, not yet. Just focus on the wood.
So just keep doing and redoing this one part?
Yeah, until you A, run out of epoxy, or B, feel like it's not absorbing anymore. My mom saw you mowing the lawn with hatters on, and she asked if your head doesn't get hot.
I don't really get hot. Well, there was this one time that I actually did get hot, but I'm just not a very hot person.
All right, actually, before I lay this down, can you just wet out just past the black line? Like, see how none of this here is wet? It's not going to absorb any because that's all fiberglass, but we just need to make sure that that's still wet. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. So now you can wet this out, and you can go all the way out to this lower line. We'll put that other piece on. I'll move your water bottle for you.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be any more sticky than it is.
See the tip of the skeg here? We keep getting that caught on things when we bring the boat up on the beach. Yeah, as you can imagine, because that kind of sticks out. So what I would like to do is cut that kind of like that. We're gonna use some Fixo Fast Cure. We're just gonna fill this right up. All right, what do you think, boss?
I think that it's pretty much done because I smoothed it over so it won't catch on anything.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to glass that. Should have thought to do this before we vacuumed and cleaned up. We gotta vacuum and clean up again. And then, yeah, if you want to come by the same time tomorrow or so, we can get this sanded down, which won't take long, and we can start putting on some more layers of glass.
Yeah, I'll come tomorrow.
Okay, so that.
I already wiped that.
Alright.
I guess it's just evaporating.
Well, it's not the prettiest glass job in the world, but it is gonna work. So Aaron and I got a few layers of glass on here. I think there's 4 on here, 2 on here, 4 on here. I have all the anti-fouling paint sanded off. The anti-fouling paint was a mistake. Bob asked me what I wanted, and I thought since Victoria was in the water so much that that's what made sense. But when the anti-fouling paint is wet, it is ablative, and it just comes off on everything. So we got white paint all over the deck, all over our clothes, and it's not a big deal, it washes off, but it is kind of annoying. So all of that has been sanded off, and I'm gonna put on some Total Protect epoxy paint, and then some topside paint. We've got our little dings repaired. So this is where we hit a rock or piece of a dock or something, and I just put a little bit of Fixo on there, give that a light sand. And we added a whole bunch of wear strips onto the stem here, so when we run Victoria up onto a beach, it lands right in here, and this had become really thin. So we left the 2 layers of glass that were there. I think we had maybe worn through the first layer, and we used a bunch of these strips and build them up on the sides and across the top. And the top couple layers, Aaron and I set in thickened epoxy. So this is pretty big and beefy and thick, and we can wear on that for a while before we're gonna be down to the stem. So there's definitely different philosophies at this point, but the one that I so far like is I hate sanding fiberglass. So I sand down the worst of it. This will get painted with the epoxy paint, and then I will put on fairing compound and go through the next layers. I just like the layer of paint first. I think it makes figuring out where the fairing compound needs to be easier. But if you like or want to try switching that order, by all means go for it and fair it and then paint it, or paint it and then fair it and paint it. I don't think it makes a ton of difference, but we're going to start with the epoxy paint. So this is where we had the worst area. You can see where I filled up the gap with thickened epoxy where the keel had pulled the planking right up. And I brought the glass right over. And this is looking pretty ugly and rough, but we'll put a layer of paint on that little smear of fairing compound, a little bit of sanding, and that'll clean up and look a lot better. And I like adding those layers and smoothing them out and sanding them, and not sanding the glass and not worrying about sanding too far. So fear not, she's not pretty now, but she will be soon.
After putting the first layers of paint on the hull with his sister, Steve started working on a better way to mount the fenders around Victoria's shear. And like all of Steve's best ideas, it'll require drilling a few holes through the boat.
I drilled all these holes oversized and put tape on the inside, filling them with this Thixo. We'll come back and sand them flush. And then when I drill the holes for the pad eyes, we'll drill them through these epoxy plugs. And that way, as these fenders get pulled around, if the bolts do work in their holes a little bit, they're just working in some epoxy and they're not tearing away at the soft cedar and letting water get in under the fiberglass. Because these fenders take such a beating against docks and against the hull, if we're somewhere it's choppy, I really want to make sure that these are attached to the hull really well. And if they're permanently affixed on the hull like this below the shear, if we do swamp Victoria someday, these are going to go a long way towards helping keep the shear above water and letting us bail her out and keep getting on our way. So I view these as, you know, kind of pretty important safety features for a tender like this. So I think now you can really see what we were clearly trying to create here. And now we're going to take our bolt, put it to our pad eye, put it to our hole, line this up nice and neatly, and drill our second hole. And this will finish hardening up through today, finish curing. But it's still being a little plasticky. It's kind of nice for this. Drill's really nice. Vicky's looking good. I'll probably have to ream these out since there's a bunch of epoxy paint in them. But as you can see, you can't tell that there's a epoxy plug in there anymore. And we've got a few coats of the Total Protect epoxy primer paint on here. And one of the things I really, really like about this paint is that you can hot coat it. So we've painted it twice, but we've done 2 or 3 coats per time we paint. If you let the paint just kick enough that you can touch it and it doesn't peel up, but isn't fully cured, you can just roll on another coat and keep going. So it's really easy to build coats. I've been super happy with this stuff. I had a couple little spots. We're gonna put a little fairing compound. You know, we've got a little bit here. Maybe here. I went in, filled in the small spots I was going to, but I mixed up more fairing compound than I needed, which I always do. It goes a long way, and I always forget that. So, instead of just wasting all the fairing compound that I mixed up and didn't need, I skim coated the top sides and most of the bottom. And the fairing compound sands easier than the epoxy primer, so I now have to do a bit less sanding to get a smooth surface on this, and it just makes life a little bit easier. Given the topside paint a couple days to dry, it takes a little while for it to cure, and if you try to sand it before it's totally dry, it gums up and makes a really crummy finish. So really important with the topside paints to give it fully enough time to cure before you go to sand. So at this point, we really have one super important question that we need to ask ourselves and look deep in our souls. And the question is, how fussy are we going to be with this paint job? Because now is kind of the time to decide that. I can give this a light sand, put on another coat of paint, call it a day, go use Victoria. She's perfectly well protected. She's going to look great from 20 feet away, and we can slap on another coat of paint next year. Could go to the other extreme, and we could sand this topside paint off completely and get down to the epoxy paint, and then we'll see these little dots of topside paint in all the low spots. We do it with a longboard, and then after that we would fair those spots in, longboard it again, put on another coat of paint, do some more sanding. If we want to go really bonkers, we can do some wet sanding with like some 3000 grit at the end. We can get Victoria to have a mirror finish, and I'm willing to bet you can guess which route I'm going. As you can see, the varnish held up quite well, even though it didn't have a ton of coats where things were vertical. Where things are horizontal, the varnish is pretty much gone. One, Bob didn't get a ton of coats on before launch, and he had warned me of that. But two, the horizontal surface just gets beaten by the sun, so it just gets way more attacked by the UV. And then our butts and Akiva's paws and bags and things are also adding to the wear and tear on this. When we're stepping in and out of the tender, sometimes these get stepped on. When Akiva goes in and out of the tender, he usually does it from on top of the forward seat here. When these are varnished and they get wet, it's pretty slippery to sit on, as well as for Akiva to jump off of. And as you can see on this old mahogany, with how much wear and tear it gets, the varnish is really, really taking a beating. So I pulled the latches out, and I am going to paint the tops of these seats with the Total Boat non-skid. And I'm going to paint the inside on the sole with some non-skid as well, so that if we don't have the floorboards in there, this is really slick on the topside paint. So we'll get that painted as well. Definitely going to change the look of Victoria. Seeing the mahogany seats is really nice, but I'm going to leave the toe rails and these knees here, I'm going to oil. I'll leave the transom here varnished. I'll leave the forward face of the locker here varnished. I'll leave the aft face of the forward bulkhead varnished. So you'll definitely be able to see some wood and see some pretty varnish, but the stuff that's really just taking a beating here, I think it's going to be more functional being painted, and even more functional being painted with the non-skid.
Well, you should see my boat.
Is it tricked out?
The opposite. Was able to tack and jibe a little bit. The Victoria felt like she handled great. We'll know more when we get her out in some real wind. I'm really excited to have the sailing rig and have this all set up when we do get back to the boat and are back to cruising life. I think being able to jump in Victoria and go for a morning or afternoon or evening little sail, or take her to go explore some little island or whatever, there's a lot of great little adventures we can go on. And it'll be a lot more fun, I think, to do it with sail than with motor, and we won't have to worry about the batteries if we do it by sail instead of motor. So I think it'll be a really, really great addition to the kit when we are back aboard, whenever that is. Thanks for joining us for this episode, and thank you very much to everyone who continues to support us on Patreon. It is allowing me to continue to pay Ben to work on some things for when we are able to really come back with the channel, and to make sure that his life isn't really horribly interrupted. I want to make sure that he and his family are financially well. So that is big priority at the moment. So anything that we do get through Patreon really helps Ben and I out with that at the moment. So thank you. Robin and I are hoping to get back up to Arabella for a few days in the coming weeks and pull some patterns for the Dodger. I think that's probably the next thing that I can kind of work on and pick away at here. Can do a little bit more in Victoria. She could use a little more paint and some touch-ups, but really the lion's share of it is all done, and at this point it would just be a little bit more cosmetic and nitpicky stuff. She's pretty good to go. So it'll be good to get another project here and continue to work a little bit towards the eventual goal of sailing and cruising, and that is still the goal, just a bit delayed. So thank you for everything, and we'll hopefully have another episode out in a few weeks. It definitely will not be our regular schedule for a while, but we will get back to it. You have my word. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
You sit down.